Our speaker today, Lew Jennings. He's been here before. It's a bit of a sour moment because Lew moved down here about 2.5 years ago, and he quickly became very popular in our community, but sad to say he's going to be moving, probably happily for him, to be with his grandchildren in Santa Cruz. So you're going to hear Lew speak today for the third time in the last couple of years. He spoke to us, as you remember, back in April and November of 2013. So I'm delighted that Lew is back, and he's going to enthrall us again with his tales of his years in Vietnam. A little background for you guys who haven't seen him before. He's a 20-year active serviceman in the US Army, including 4 years with the Navy and the Marine Corps. He flew 726 helicopter combat missions in Vietnam, and he was awarded over 50 combat decorations, including 3 Distinguished Flying Crosses. After the war, he flew commuters with American Eagle, and later he was flying DC-10s for World Airways on wet charters. He performed 131 humanitarian flights in 2005 when he was flying in support of the disaster in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and Rita. At age 63, he went back to flying, if you can imagine, and flew 800 missions of reconnaissance, surveillance, and logistics flights in Iraq. And he talked about that in a program he did for us here, as I say, in November of last year, called Band of Brothers. He's a life member of the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association, the Distinguished Flying Cross Society, and Disabled American Veterans. That wasn't enough for him. He's still flying today, and in fact he's building an experimental Glasair in a hangar down in Thumb. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Lew back and to say farewell to him. Lew, you'll always be welcome, sir, so come on back when you're in this part of town.
Thank you.
It's great to see you back. Bye-bye.
Okay, I'm mic'd. Good morning, everybody. Certainly is my honor to be invited back to speak with you this morning. And guess what we're going to talk about? Helicopters. There's all sorts of names, you know, those things that beat the air into submission, and they don't call us pilots, they call us rotor heads and all kinds of other things I don't want to mention. But certainly it's my pleasure to be here this morning, and we'll see if I can't take you through some of the things we did in Vietnam and the impact that the helicopter has had worldwide. Good morning, Tom, by the way. I didn't get a chance to talk to you. I'm not technically proficient this morning. Need my check right.
You need a check right.
Let's take you back to the 60s. What a great period, wasn't it? Oh my God. Oh my goodness. You know, we just went through the Cuban crisis. Russia was a big threat. Communism was expanding all over the world. We just by that much almost had a nuclear war on our hands. President Kennedy was in office back then. We had this little country of Vietnam, which was 15,000 miles away, that nobody ever heard of or cared about. We had about 6,000 advisors in country. Dien Bien Phu had happened in 1954. The French had been kicked out. The Geneva Accords had split the country into 2 halves, like North and South Korea. It was now North and South Vietnam, controlled by the communists in the north and democratic government in the south. When President Kennedy came in, he had just dealt with this huge situation in Cuba, and now he saw the encroaching communism out in the Far East and decided to increase the assistance to the Vietnamese government to try to stop that. So we went from about 6,000 advisors to about 15,000 advisors. Unfortunately, President Kennedy was assassinated, as you know, and Lyndon Johnson took over. Lyndon assumed that role, of course, as president, and of course, again, the support to the South Vietnamese, and we started ramping it up aggressively. As we increased our participation out there, anybody recognize this guy? Bob McNamara, the longest person to have the Secretary of Defense role in the history of the U.S. from 1961 to 1968. He came over as president of Ford Motor Company, and he was a statistics guy, so he wanted numbers. He was a numbers cruncher, and if you didn't produce numbers, you weren't very successful in his business. So he looked at what was going on out there, and he faced a formidable problem. The North Vietnamese were conducting operations into South Vietnam, and they were using the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which many of us have heard about. What is the Ho Chi Minh Trail? It's all those red things that you see on the map there. And what they did is they set up these avenues of communication and transportation and supply networks that used the countries of Laos and Cambodia, and they brought their supplies and things south without having to face formidable opposition from either the South Vietnamese or the U.S. Why? Because they bypassed us, and then they came in from the west, incursion into South Vietnam. And what were we faced with? We were faced with a country that was mountainous in the north, and you see any roads there? There are no roads. It's mountainous, it's jungle, and if you get into the mountains, this is what you're faced with, trying to get through this kind of thing. Okay? So we couldn't use tanks, we couldn't use trucks, we couldn't use armored vehicles, and we were faced with, down in the south, what? Miles and miles, thousands of square miles of rice paddies. Probably the largest rice growing region in the world, which is also why the North wanted the South. So then we were faced with, how do we move people, supplies, and equipment when we're faced with this kind of terrain? So McNamara said, why don't we start looking at the use of helicopters in a big way? Because this is how we get to war in Vietnam. We had to walk. We had to carry a rucksack and a rifle, maybe get a truck for a while, and then dump us on the ground. We had some old CH-21 wooden rotor blades. We had CH-34s, the old Marine Corps reciprocating engine helicopters, but not a whole lot. We couldn't move masses of troops and supply. So McNamara ordered the Secretary of the Army and the Army staff to start looking at how are you going to use helicopters to move, shoot, and communicate in a big way. So up comes Hamilton House, a very renowned general. He was a general, his father was a general, his brother was a general, very successful guy in the Army, very successful commander in World War II, an airborne general. And luckily for us, he became an aviator. And he actually was chief of Army aviation for several years. So when they started looking at somebody that could actually do some tests and figure out how to use helicopters in warfare, they turned to Hamilton House. Hamilton House set up the House Board, and he actually told the Army, okay, if we're going to do this and we're going to do it right, I want a division. There's only like 6 or 8 divisions in the whole world. I mean, these are huge organizations. He says, I want a division. And they said, well, McNamara says we got to have a division, so here we go. He formed the 11th Test Division and brought in assets from all over the country, established it in Georgia, conducted operations for about a year, and figured out how to move, shoot, and communicate using Hueys for transport. We just started getting the Hueys. It was built in 1957. We started getting them in about 1960 and 61. So now we've got the Huey, our first turbine, real troop-carrying helicopter into the force. And he said, well, how are we going to shoot as well? We didn't have any gunships at the time, so soldiers, you know, they tried to figure out things on the fly, and so we took the Hueys and started just mounting guns on them and mounting rockets on them. And the problem is this little Huey trying to keep up with the troop-carrying helicopters after we put all this armament on it. And by the way, we would load them up until they couldn't fly, and then they'd have to skid through the mud to get off the ground. A thing called translational lift, where that airflow gets through the rotor system and increases and gives you boosted power by about 20%. That's the only way we could get off the ground. A little funny story, 20 years or 18 years later, I'm flying with the Navy And in the Army, we never had enough power to hover, you know. We always loaded up the helicopter too heavy, so we all shot our approaches right to the ground. So if you see some of the old films of Army helicopters flying, they come in and land, and they just go, boom, and hit the ground and slide through the glass. So the first time I'm flying with the Navy, I was supposed to land aboard ship, and I just, okay, I'm going to shoot right to the ship. I get right down there, and they start grabbing the controls, crying in the back, screaming, and what the hell are you doing? I said, that's all I need to know. Just, you want to land on the deck? We'll land on the deck. We don't need to hover and wait for the big But the problem with this, we loaded it up so much it couldn't keep up with our troop-carrying helicopters, and you'll see what we did later on. Now we're trying to move, shoot, and communicate. We got to also move this Army, and then we got to supply them and support them. And how do we do that? By the way, I forgot one element. We have to go out and recon and recon and recon. Do reconnaissance and find out where the bad guys are. And this is when we introduced the 086A, which was built by Hughes Helicopter Company back at that time. One of the finest helicopters ever made, and very beloved by Army pilots. So to support all that, we developed, in conjunction with Boeing, Vertol, and Piasecki, the CH-47 Chinook, which is still with us today. It's like the old B-52. We just keep modding it and modding it and modding it and increasing horsepower, and it's still with us. And also this strange-looking helicopter. How many of you seen this? It's called a CH-54 Sky Crane, built by Sikorsky. Didn't make very many of them, but it could lift more than a ton. It lifted a whole lot. But what was unique about this helicopter is you had a pilot and co-pilot up front, and then you had a flight engineer in the back. And when you came down to hover over a load, the pilot and co-pilot fly down over the load, then they had turned the controls over to the flight engineer, because he's facing backward and looking down onto what he has to pick up. They said, that's the hard part, you get to do that. So he had his own controls. He would hover down, they'd hook up the load, he would bring up the load, and then he'd hand the controls back to the pilot and co-pilot, and off they'd go. So here we are, now we've got Hamilton House, this experimental 11th Assault Division. We're trying to get all these helicopters together and figure out how we're going to fly and move, shoot, and communicate in a massive way. And he was the father of air assault, where we did massive formations to put enough troops on the ground in a single operation so that we could fight and defeat the enemy. And then use all these other helicopters in support of the infantrymen on the ground. After he did that for a year, he went back to the Army and went back to the Secretary of Defense, said this is what we have and this is what we need. The SecDef approved it, and they decided to use the 1st Cavalry Division as the first experiment. They took the 1st Cavalry Division and changed it to air mobile. We traded in the horses for helicopters in a big way, like almost 400 helicopters. And it was a massive organization. After we did that in 1965, after some training in the US and some organization, that sort of thing, we deployed it to Vietnam. This was in 1966. We put everybody aboard ship, helicopters and all, landed at the beach in Vietnam, and then deployed to An Thê, little town, and decided to do our first operations, which happened to be one of the largest battles we ever had in all of the history of Vietnam, called the Battle of the Ai Drang Valley. In that operation, we had a young major at the time, Hal Moore, who was the battalion commander, and who ended up getting the Medal of Honor because of his courage and his leadership and his actions when they were under fire. I was fortunate enough later on to be Hal's General Moore's personal pilot for a brief period. You may remember him a little bit because he wrote a book called We Were Soldiers Once and Young, and that was made into a movie with Mel Gibson. Another interesting character at the time in the 1st Cavalry Division was Colonel John Stockton, 1st of the 9th Cav. How many people have heard of that? Then you're an old Army guy, probably. because that's a famous cavalry squadron in the Army. But what John Stockton did is he wanted to hold on to the character and the spirit of the Cav. And so he required everybody in his organization, whether you were an enlisted private or whether you were a warrant officer, helicopter pilot, or a platoon leader or whatever, you all wore a black Stetson. And that became the honor for all cavalrymen throughout the Army. And I've been in 2 Cav squadrons and 1 cavalry regiment. I still have my black Stetson. I'm sorry I couldn't bring it this morning, but it's packed in storage now because we're moving. But we all still wear the Stetson to this day, even in combat. John Stockton, was portrayed by this guy many years later in an absolutely ridiculous movie called Apocalypse Now, but some of the greatest helicopter scenes ever filmed. Anybody recognize him? Yeah, Bob Duvall. Robert Duvall. I still laugh over that. And I've actually portrayed him many times in different presentations and skits and stuff, and it's always been fun. Getting too old for that. Now we're at 1967. Talk about ramping up. We're now at 504,000 American soldiers committed in Vietnam. We are there in a big way. Besides the 1st Division, the 1st Cavalry Division, we needed 2 of these air mobile divisions, so the other one that was selected was the 101st Airborne. And the 101st Airborne, very begrudgingly, had to trade in their parachutes for helicopters. And they were deployed the following year in 1967. And this was probably the worst day of my life because I was going to college at night, I was working full-time during the day, and I wasn't carrying enough credits, I didn't know anybody politically, and I didn't have a Canadian passport. So sure enough, I got this little notice in the mail that said, report. It was the draft, as you know, and I was drafted. And I go, oh my God, my worst experience, I'm going to have to do this. Carry a rucksack and a rifle in Vietnam. Because this was the first war that was covered live by news media and television. And so we, you know, as a young guy in high school and now out of high school and working, you'd see this in the news every single day. So this is what I thought was my worst experience. A very honorable profession, and this guy, carrying a rucksack and a rifle, became the center of my life for many more years to come. But this is what my biggest fear was at the time. And believe it or not, I had my pilot's license. I had been working and washing cars and saving money, but even when I was a kid, because my dad was a pilot, and I used to watch him and want to be like him, and I had my pilot's license when I was still a teenager. So of course, what do you do if you don't want to carry a rucksack and a rifle, and you want to fly? Who are you going to go see? If you want to fly high, you're going to go to the Air Force. So I went trooping down to the recruiting places in San Jose, California. And I run in there and I say, hey, I'm Lew, and I got a pilot's license and I want to fly high. And everybody just started laughing. They said, son, do you have 4 years of college? And I said, no, I'm too young. I don't have 4 years of college. And they said, well, look, you can't fly high unless you have 4 years of college. So you can't fly in the Air Force. And I didn't know what to do. I just stood there in shock. And I said, well, dang it, what am I supposed to do? And they said, well, why don't you go next door and talk to those guys? The U.S. Navy. I said, Blue Angels, absolutely. I go next door, I walk in, hey, I'm Lew, and I got a pilot's license. Guess what they did? They started rolling on the floor, just laughing, saying, son, you do have 4 years of college? And I said, that's what the Air Force just asked me. I don't have 4 years, I'm too young. And they said, well, look, you can't be a Blue Angel if you don't have 4 years of college. And then I was getting sick to my stomach, my lip was quivering, and I started getting a little tear in my eye. And I go, holy crap, I'm in real trouble here. And this old gunny sergeant, he's been sitting right where Penny is the whole time. And just like her, she's giving me the evil eye. He's been looking at me the whole time, and he ain't smiling. And this is what we think that those guys do. And he comes up, by the way, this is Lee Emery, I think you probably know him, the most famous drill sergeant of all time, played a fantastic role in Full Metal Jacket, and he actually trained Louis Gossett Jr. as the drill sergeant and officer and a gentleman. He was so good that, I'm getting off target here, but he was so good that when he interviewed for Apocalypse Now, he did one take, and they said, you have the role and you can even write the script. Anyways, he gets up, not Lee, but the gunny sergeant comes up and he puts his arm around me. And you know they won't do that if you're in the Marine Corps, but he said, son, he said, you know what you need to do? And he said, what, sir? Don't call me sir. It's, what do I need to do? He said, you need to go next door and talk to the Army. I said, the Army? I said, they have airplanes? And he said, well, they've got these things that fly, and they need a lot of pilots. Well, little did I know, as purportedly reported in the media, Newsweek, Aviation Week, average life expectancy of an Army helicopter pilot in combat was 19 minutes. And they needed a lot of pilots. And so what the Army did to be able to do that was they lowered the requirement to a high school education. And they developed the Warrant Officer Flight Training Program. Any warrant officers in here? Any rotor heads? There you are. Any rotor heads in here? Hey, I love you guys. So I went next door to the Army, and I walk in, and I say, hi, I'm Lew, and I got a sit right down here, son. Are you a high school graduate? And I said, yes, sir. And he says, you want to be a pilot? We'll make you a pilot. And so for the next 20 minutes, I sat there and listened to all these beautiful things about the Warrant Officer Flight Training Program and how I will have no problem becoming a pilot. I just have to go through a few hoops, go before a board, pass a flight physical, take a test, and blah, blah, blah. And he says, you're not going to have any trouble at all. And I am so ecstatic, I can't stop smiling. And I'm signing paperwork faster than I'm not even looking at it. Just put it in front of me and I'm signing it. And about 20 minutes later, he says, okay, you are set. You're going to be in the United States Army. And I said, oh, that's fabulous. And I get up and I start to walk away, and he said, sit down. I didn't like that. So I come back and I sit down, and he said, before you leave, I have to tell you something. I said, yes. And he said, in the Army, you are a soldier first and a pilot second. I said, what does that mean? He said, in this program, we are going to send you to basic infantry training, and you are going to become an infantryman carrying a rucksack and a rifle before we send you to flight school. And about then, I almost, ground my pants. And I said, no. And he said, don't worry about it. You've got a pilot's license. You will have no trouble at all. Because when you go to flight school, if you don't graduate, guess where you're going with a rucksack and a rifle? And I said, oh no! So anyways, I get home, I call my dad, and I said, Dad, I joined the U.S. Army. And he couldn't talk for about 10 minutes. He was so upset. And he was retired Coast Guard and Navy. And then I had to explain to him, I tried the Navy and I tried the Air Force, and I already knew I didn't qualify for the Coast Guard, Dad. So this was my only resort if I didn't want to carry a rucksack and a rifle and I want to be a pilot. And so he calmed down, and 2 weeks later he took me to the airport and he put me in a little Schweitzer 300 with an instructor, and he said, now let's see if you can fly it. And of course, I lost control in 20 seconds, and then I said, this is going to be a little harder than I thought. You know? I graduated, by the way, this was the 2 longest months of my life. Anybody else done that? Whether you're Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, or Army, boot camp is no fun. And I graduated boot camp, and sure enough, I got to go to flight school. And back then in the 60s, the U.S. Army had the largest Air Force in the free world. We had tens of thousands of helicopters. And this was our largest training base, was at Fort Walters, Texas. And this is where we did our primary flight training. All the aircraft were just little recip aircraft, Bell 47s, Hillers, and in this case, our brand new, also made by Howard Hughes, was the TH-55, T meaning TH training helicopter. Very difficult to fly initially. It was much more sensitive than the other helicopters, but it was a whole lot of fun. I mean, for you that don't fly helicopters, I feel badly for you. You have never had so much fun until you've been in a helicopter. Of course, it'll kill you in a heartbeat, but other than that, it's a lot of fun. After 5 months of training here, then they send you to advanced training. And at that time, we were trying to crank out so many pilots that we actually had 2 advanced training bases. The big one at Fort Rucker, Alabama, which is the home of Army Aviation. And at that time, we had Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia. And I got to go to Hunter. And the reason I really wanted to go to Hunter was because you got to fly Hueys. And at Hunter, then we trained in the Hueys from the get-go. We did all of our tactical and formation flight, night flight, and we even got to do 10 hours of instrument orientation. But all that did was teach us never fly in the clouds. Because that's instant death. But after I got through that, I was fortunate enough, I graduated top in my class. And because of that, I was given the opportunity then to choose advanced helicopter training. Did I want to go cargo helicopter and fly the H-47s? Did I want to go utility helicopter and fly the Hueys? Or did I want to go attack helicopter and fly the brand new AH-1G Cobra? This was the coolest airplane. So of course I took guns. But to give you an idea what the Cobra was, we took the drivetrain, the guts of the Huey, the turbine engine back here is 1,400 horsepower. We took most of the drivetrain and incorporated that, but then we made it real skinny. It's only 36 inches wide at its widest point, and it flies through the air about 50 or 60 knots faster than the Huey. So not only could we keep up with the formations of the troop carrying helicopters, we could do a whole lot of other good stuff too. Had 2 little wings on it. Those were not aerodynamic. They were just stuck there so that you could hang armament on them. In this case, this is a 7-shot rocket pod and a 19-shot rocket pod. At the time, in 1967, we had 2.75-inch folding fin aerial rockets. And those were still from World War II or Korea, we think. And they had little bitty 7-pound warheads. Towards about the middle of my tour in Vietnam, we were so rapidly trying to provide the soldiers and the crews and that with newer, better equipment that I had 17-pound warheads for every rocket that equated to the same killing radius as a 105 millimeter howitzer round. And we could carry up to 72 of those bad boys. Go back here. In the front, we had a turret, and it's kind of hard to see here, but that's an Emerson electric Gatling gun. Fired 2,500 rounds per minute. And that was at low rate. And on the other side, little stubby thing over there is a 40 millimeter grenade launcher. We could fire 300 grenades per minute. Yeah. And then this thing swiveled back and forth. And so the Army is smart though, you know. How many of you flew fighter jets and stuff? Yeah, I'm jealous of you guys too. But, you know, the other services, Navy and Air Force, flying those great looking fighter jets, the pilot usually sits in the front, right? Nah, not in the Army. We're kind of different. We put the pilot in the back. And so the pilot sits in the back here, and he controls all the systems, and the co-pilot gunner sits up here, and he's got this gun sight. So we'll take a look at where he sits, and that's this little place here. This is for the co-pilot gunner. He's got, go back here, showing you all my stuff. The co-pilot gunner, he's got a little cyclic there. The cyclic is the same thing as a stick in an airplane. Push it forward, go forward, backward, left, right, and all. So we gave him some degree of control over the airplane, and then we gave him a collective over here on the left. The collective is what you pull up and down to make the helicopter up and down or go faster. But that's all. You know, he has hardly any instruments, and he had some emergency controls in case something happened to the pilot in the back. And then he had a little bit of armor here on the side to protect his bottom. And he has this gun sight up here, which you take off the mount and you put it in your lap, and then you can swivel that turret back and forth and fire the machine gun and fire the grenade launcher with that. In the back sits the pilot, and he has all the instruments so that he can hopefully fly the aircraft at night, and heaven forbid through a cloud or something. And then he has all the radios, because we usually talked on 3 different radios at the same time. One that was our company freak or troop freak to talk to each other. Another one was to talk to the air traffic control or the guys in the sky, Crown, and those kinds of folks. And then the other one was to talk to the troops on the ground, which is FM or Fox Mike. And what you see over here on the right that looks like a VOR indicator, over here, we actually used with that Fox Mike radio. So if somebody called us and said, hey, I'm in bad trouble and I need your help, we say, well, where are you? And he says, I don't know, because he's in jungle and elephant grass over his head. We can say, hey, give me a long count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The long count goes to 10 and back. And all the time that he's talking, we can use this to try to zero in and at least figure out, well, he's on that azimuth, and let's try to go find him. Anyway, so all the stuff to control the helicopter and all the weapon systems was in the back seat. Then I got to Vietnam, and I checked into my unit, 7th and 1st Cavalry down in 4th Corps, which was where all those rice paddies and that were. I was at Vinh Long. And the first thing I was told was, Lew, you know, you're going to have to fly as co-pilot gunner. And I said, well, that makes sense. I'm a brand new guy, sure. And they said, you don't understand. And I said, what do you mean I don't understand? They said, you know, they call it co-pilot gunner, but your real job is bullet catcher. I said, come on, bullet catcher. And they said, damn right, bullet catcher. Because you are going to fly in the front seat up here for 3 months. And if you live, then you get to be pilot. I go, oh my God, what other challenges am I going to meet with this organization? Anyways, but that was the case for almost every organization that we flew Cobras with. Correct me anybody if I'm wrong with your unit, but in every unit I was in, you had to fly for several months in the front seat as a bullet catcher, and if you lived, you got to fly back seat after that, aircraft commander. And this particular configuration, we could carry the big rocket pods, we could carry 4 of those, and we could also have 2 miniguns up front if we wanted. But in the cavalry, our mission was reconnaissance. So normally, we had to have at least 2 hours of endurance. So we couldn't just carry all the weapons that we possibly could and sacrifice our gas. We had to always balance between the two, so we had 2 hours of endurance. But it didn't matter. We filled it up until it wouldn't fly, and we would skid it through the mud until we could get it airborne, which sometimes we crashed. This is me, actually. I'm flying with my unit 7th and 1st Cav down in the Delta. And the interesting thing about this photo is that we're flying real high for a helicopter, because there was nowhere to hide down in the Delta, because it was all flat. There were hardly any trees, you know, there's no mountains to speak of. So to stay out of small arms fire, we usually flew anywhere from 900 to 1,200 feet above the ground. But in the cavalry, who else did we fly with was our little bird, our little scout helicopter, because our mission is reconnaissance. Our mission is to go out and find and fix the enemy. Destroy them if we can, but develop the situation, and if it's more than we can handle, then we call in the rest of the Army, or the Air Force, or the Marines, or whoever, because it's more than we can handle. But our primary mission was reconnaissance. So it was a problem for us to keep sight of that little bird from that high, but if we flew any lower than that, most of the time you get pretty well shot up. We escorted the Hueys is one of our missions. We prepped the landing zones on both sides, both to put the troops in and to take the troops out. We would come in with our rockets and shoot on both sides of the landing zone or all the way around to keep the bad guys from killing our troops as they're trying to get off or board the helicopters. We would fly with our scout helicopters called hunter-killer teams. You may have 2 Cobras and 2 scouts, like excuse me, we had down south. Or as you'll see later, I get assigned up north, and in this huge, vast, mountainous area, we would just deploy 1 Cobra and 1 scout so we could cover more territory. By the way, there's that Emerson electric Gatling gun we actually mounted on the side of the little light observation helicopter, so we had some kind of protection. This helicopter, by the way, why it was so beloved in the Army was, number one, it was simple, and so it was mechanically easier to maintain than others. But what the real sales point for us is it had a built-in roll cage, just like an egg, okay? But it had a built-in roll cage all the way around it. So in some cases, when our guys crashed, and they crashed a lot, they would flip, roll everything and fly off, rotor blades, tail rotor, tail boom and all that, and they'd still be sitting there in their seat surrounded by this roll cage wondering what the hell happened. Our primary mission, though, always for Army helicopter pilots was to support this guy. The guy on the ground carrying the rucksack and rifle. There was nothing that we wouldn't do to help him out. And that was ingrained in us from the first day at flight school, and still is today. About 3 months after I was down in the Delta, believe it or not, I survived, and I was aircraft commander flying in the back seat. And as soon as that happened, they said, "Lew, we're going to send you up north." And I said, "I don't want to go up north. I've heard about up north." They said, "No, the 101st Airborne is up there, as you know. They've arrived, and one of their new cavalry squadrons has come over from Fort Knox or Fort Campbell, Kentucky. In this case, our troop came from Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And so when everybody comes over, not very many of them are experienced in country, and they need to mix up all the pilots. So you've got experienced guys and non-experienced guys. They call it infusion, so they're going to infuse the new unit with experienced people. So here I am, brand new AC aircraft commander, and I get infused up north to be with the 101st Airborne. And one of the first operations we got into was Apache Snow, and that was to deny the North Vietnamese the Ashaw Valley. The Ashaw Valley was a totally infamous place in Vietnam. It was the home of huge battles at a fire base called Ripcord, and the biggest battles we had was on Hamburger Hill, Dang Ngoc Bia, Hill 937, which our own Dan Bresnahan knows better than anybody because he was on the ground as a platoon leader fighting that battle. And small world, I actually supported Dan with my gunship, and we didn't even know each other at the time until years later. When he got out of Vietnam and back home, in one piece, which is unbelievable after Hamburger Hill. He decided he may not want to do that again. And maybe he wants to stop carrying a rucksack and a rifle. So he went to flight school, became a Cobra pilot, and came right back to my unit. And I was already finished and gone and all sorts of things. But it was 25 years later, we finally met each other and said, wow, you were doing this and I was doing this, and strange things. The Ashaw Valley was really gorgeous. It was beautiful at the time. It was like entering the lost world when you flew in there. Banana trees that were gigantic. Jungle that was 100 feet high. Elephants. Big cats. One time I saw an alligator come out of a stream and I went down below to look at it. It wasn't an alligator, it was a lizard. It was that big. I mean, it was like something out of the lost world. It was really strange. But it was also the home and haven to the North Vietnamese. And they used this as a huge base with several of their regiments. This is the kind of terrain we were faced with, and that Dan was faced with on the ground, and we were faced with flying. And tactics changed completely for me. Remember down south, we're flying between 900 and 1,200 feet? That would get us killed up here. We ended up flying down around 300 feet or even lower. And the reason is when the bad guys are in the jungle, if you're down low, they just get a glimpse as you go by, you know. But if you're flying high, you go, well, I got all day long to shoot him down. So we ended up changing our tactics completely, at least with the gunships. Our scouts never changed. Our scouts, crazy scout helicopter pilots, they always flew about 6 inches to 10 feet. I think 10 feet was about their highest altitude. And these are those guys. One of my very first missions was with a guy named Al Goodspeed. And Al and I were assigned to go out to the Ashaw Valley. And we were doing an early morning reconnaissance. And we were going to check out the valley. We were having an operation up on Firebase Ripcord, which is on a hill overlooking the valley. Hamburger Hill had not started yet. And Al and I came over the lip, dove down into the valley, and we're just kind of in awe. You know, we're looking around, saying, boy, this is really beautiful country. We know the bad guys are here somewhere, but we don't know where. And we're flying, and we're reconning, we're doing this and that. We get up to the end of the valley, and they're waiting for us. And sadly, this is how that ended. Al got shot multiple times by a 50 caliber anti-aircraft weapon, and it ran through his transmission, through the cockpit, made the rotor blades stop in midair. He crashed, rolled over several times. We landed next to the helicopter with my gunship. My co-pilot Mike Talton got out. The observer, Sergeant Brown, had his legs severed, and they had to take Mike's little caliber .38 pistol and make a tourniquet. And while I'm screaming on the radio, getting the Air Force and the cavalry and everybody else in to help us out, we tore a door off of the helicopter, one of these clamshell doors on the engine, put him on that, and then we had a Huey come in and put him on there, backed him. He lived, he lost his leg, but he lived. Al is one of the biggest guys in the unit. I don't know, that's another anomaly. You know, I'm 5 feet 8 inches tall. So what do? I fly the gunship. I put the seat all the way to the floor, and when you see me take off, all you see is 2 little eyeballs, you know, because I'm so low. Al is the biggest guy in the unit. What's he fly? He flies these little bitty helicopters. He's so big, he gets in there and he's got to hunch over like this to try to fly it. Al survived this, and while I was sitting there in the elephant grass waiting, I'm seeing wires and little telephone poles, and I'm saying, man, this is not good, because that's how the North Vietnamese communicated, was either by runner or by wire. And there it was. So I'm thinking we're going to get ambushed in any second. We get the guys out of there. Al comes running through and puts a big smacker right on my windshield, trying to kiss me through the cockpit, and then we get him on a Huey and get him evacuated. That was our first mission. Hamburger Hill started 2 weeks later. That was in May of 1969, when 4 battalions, actually 2 battalions in the actual attack, 1 battalion, 2 in reserve. but Dan could tell us more about that. But that was a horrendous, horrendous battle. They charged the hill 11 times over a period of 2 weeks, and that became my primary focus in life during that time. And this is what it looked like for us. I would go out to support Dan and his troops. I would come from home base. I would be fully loaded with at least 2 hours of fuel. I'd be fully loaded with as many rockets as I could carry, minigun, and grenade launcher. I would go out to support Dan. Hamburger Hill was so intense, I would be out of ammo in 20 minutes. I would have fired every rocket and every bullet and every grenade I had. So the Army's smart. You know, you guys that flew in the Air Force and Navy, I mean, you come in and you drop your bombs and you go, okay, I'm finished, and you fly back to Da Nang, and that plane captain's waiting for you, and you go up and you chock your wheels, and he helps you with your seat belt and puts you in an air-conditioned truck, and you go to the officers club and you have a chicken salad sandwich while somebody's loading your airplane. Ah, man. I have been jealous of you guys. And Navy guys, you go, oh, it's so hard to land on the carrier. You go, give me a break. You land on the carrier, you get to the wardroom, and then the steward's got your chicken salad sandwich while somebody's hitting the airplane. The Army's smarter than that. We took our bullets and our ammo and everything, and we had these secret locations out in the jungle. And we'd put a slit trench out there, and we would bury all of our ammo, and we would have a big blivet of gas, and maybe a Briggs and Stratton little motor to pump it. And those locations were only 5 minutes from Hamburger Hill. So I'd fire up all my ammo, and I only had to go 5 minutes land. And normally, this is at a fire base where we had help, normally we have to do it ourselves. So I'd land the aircraft, take it to flight idle, and not shut it off. I'd take my helmet off, had my 40-pound chicken plate. We wore a 40-pound chicken plate to try to protect us up here. Now it's Kevlar and lightweight, but back then it felt like the world on your shoulders. And I take that off and I jump out of the airplane and I tell my co-pilot, come on, we got to get back and help Dan. We only have just a few minutes to turn around. Let's not even fool with the Gatling gun and the grenade launcher. That takes way too long. Let's just do rockets. So we would actually find these boxes with rockets in one box and warheads in the other, and we would break the bands on those, take the whole thing apart, screw the warhead into the rocket, flip it around, flip the safety off, jam it into the tube. I'd run around the back with my breakout knife and slam it into the back to make sure the contact was right, and hope to God that it didn't accidentally shoot one. And we would get there and we would have a turnaround in maybe 10 or 12 minutes. And we would be right back into the battle. Those are called forward area rearm and refuel points. My wife always laughs at this photo. This is me, by the way. And this is my co-pilot gunner bullet catcher, Mike Talden, with he always had a Thompson submachine gun or some exotic weapon, and he actually became a gun dealer in real life. And he just retired from Rockwell Collins as a senior program manager. He and I talk about small worlds. He hired me at Rockwell Collins to help put in a $100 million computer system. So I got to work with him again 30 years later for a couple of years at Rockwell Collins. Anyways, I'm getting off point here. My wife always laughed at this because she says, what happened to your abs? We didn't eat very well back then. You know, like you see a horse that's starving, you see the ribs sticking out. That's kind of what I looked like back there. When I got home, I weighed 138 pounds. No chicken salad sandwiches if you're a cab pilot. Yeah, that was some fun times. Look at all this stuff. This is an experimental aircraft because we had these Gatling guns mounted on the wings. We only had one aircraft like that in our unit, and we kind of tested it to see how it would work. Because what was cool about the Gatling gun is that when you got the bullets streaming out that fast, it just looks like a fire hose, because every 6th or 7th round is a tracer round. And it is so accurate when we don't have it in the swivel mode, if we have it locked, or if I have it mounted on wings like this. I'm flying the helicopter down and I'm looking right at you. I can put the bullets within about 5 feet before I start getting nervous. And that is from the sky. So it is so accurate. If I have troops under fire and they're in real trouble, I can start out here shooting and then I can just bring those right in to help them out. And that's what happened with this particular one. I was flying a mission in the Ashaw Valley. We got a call. I was in my bunk at night. The CO came in and he said, "Volunteers." Yeah, right. And he said, you. He said, "No, Lew, come on. We got a real bad situation. We have a Marine Corps Force Recon team. It's on the mountains out in the Ashaw Valley. They have been overrun. They set up their night defensive position, and the bad guys knew they were there and actually came in and climbed up into the trees and were shooting down on them. So these guys were screaming for help. And you know, we don't usually fly at night and in clouds like I talked about. And in this case, he says, "Look, I know we got some overcast." He says, "If you're willing to do it, I'll climb up in my Huey, and we know it's clear on top. You climb up through the clouds in your gunship, and I'll have my Grimes light on, my rotating beacon, because normally we flew blacked out at night." And he says, "We'll just figure out where each other's at, and then we're going to fly out to the mountains in the Ashaw." We had no way, we had no radar. We had no navigation aids out there. What they were going to do is the radar guys were going to track us and then say, "Yep, you're over the valley, you can descend now." And we were flying on top. And so out we went. We got the word we were over the valley. We spiraled down through the clouds, hoping that we would not hit the ground before we broke out. We broke out underneath, and we had so much good illumination from the moon, and it was actually a really cool deal. And we could actually see some things. We had no night vision goggles back then. This was early history. And then what happened is I got in contact with a team that was in trouble, and the NCO of the team put a strobe light inside a sea ration can, and I gave him the azimuth that I was from his location, and he took that and pointed it in my direction, so the bad guys couldn't see his strobe light, and I could. And I said, "I got you, I'm coming in, everybody dig a hole." And he kept his strobe light on, everybody dug themselves and covered up, and then using these guns on the wings, I was able to come in and saw the trees down, just like a bus. I just went back and forth. The trees were just falling down, and the bad guys were killed. And that was one of the coolest missions I was on. Some more pictures of Hamburger Hill. We lost some of our own guys there. Mark Stevens crashed upside down on his second attempt in there. He was recommended for the Medal of Honor because he gathered the guys on the ground, used C4, a detonation cord, to blow a new LZ to get the guys out. And so he was a pilot that became a ground commander instantly. He ended up with a Silver Star with that. Mark and I ended up serving together in Iraq 30 years later. Also, a small world. A fellow named John Reesner in another unit, the 101st Assault Helicopter Company, Ghost Riders. He was out there and he got shot down and had recovered his crew and was in a bomb crater and screaming for help. And I was out there doing my thing, and I got the word to help these guys out and try to save them in this bomb crater. So I'm flying around and I'm shooting and scooting and having a great time, talking to the guys on the ground and crying, "Oh, get me out of here, get me out of here." So, well, I can't get you out of there, but I'll get a Huey in there, but in the meantime, I'll just shoot everything in sight. So I did that until I ran out of ammo. And then we recovered them and off they went. And I thought I would never hear from them again. I got assigned to Fort Ord coming back. We're all sitting around in the hangar telling more stories, and this guy, John Reesner, says, you were in that unit? He said, boy, one of your guys saved my bacon, man. I was trapped in this bomb crater after I crashed, and he came in and he did the... Hello? And 10 years later, I'm flying, actually 20 years later, I'm flying commuters for American Eagle. I got an overnight in Fresno or somewhere, and I'm in my motel watching TV, and there comes John Reesner on the television. And he's a deputy sheriff with Alameda County Sheriff, and he has just, using his own means, conscience, brains, gut feeling, he had tracked down a serial rapist. It took him like 3 months, and he got him. And so he was being interviewed by the local media there in San Francisco. So, interesting. We lost our own helicopters too. Recognize this helicopter? It's the same one. It's got the experimental stuff on the wing stores. We lost 2 of them. Dick Datto, which gave me nightmares for years. I had been fighting the same little unit on Hamburger Hill after Dan and them recovered off the hill. The NBA would just come over. It was only 1.2 miles from Laos, so they'd just come over from Laos and reoccupy the damn hill. So I would go out there and try to shoot them up, and I had the same engineering unit with a bulldozer that I attacked on 3 different days. And I'd lay in my bed at night thinking, how am I going to do this tomorrow and not get shot down? You know? So I'd figure out all these different ways and tactics and stuff that come in. And after you do that twice, you don't want to do it a 3rd time. So I had done it twice, and then it was my day off, and Dickie had taken the aircraft and went out to do it, and he decided to attack him the 3rd time. And they were waiting for him, and they shot his tail boom off with a rocket-propelled grenade, and that became a huge deal. The whole rest of the day was trying to save their lives. He got severely injured, and we ended up, he's alive today, and we talk to each other probably once a week. And anyways, yeah. So we lost a couple of our Cobras, including my roommate, Mike Talton, that you saw back in with his ammo gun. He became a great aircraft commander, and he also got shot down, but he survived and stayed with the unit. This is Al Goodspeed again. Right at the end, we're in the last month. I'm ready to come home. Al is already ready to come home. He's only got 10 days left. We're sent out to the Ashaw Valley to do an early morning recon. There's too much fog, so we radio back, no ops until it burns off for another couple hours. And we're starting to get over the lip of the valley heading home, and he's, 6 inches to 10 feet. He's flying down there, and he says, holy cow! He says, I got bicycle tracks everywhere, and I got footprints and boot prints everywhere. And he said, the water is still seeping into the prints. And I go, oh, that's nice to know. I said, hey, you're coming up on a curve in the road, and just be careful now, watch out, because there's some elephant grass on the right, so keep your eyes out. And sure enough, he turns the corner, the bad guys jump out of the elephant grass point blank with automatic weapons and unload on him. And he hits his pedal, turns his tail towards the bad guys, and one bullet comes over the top of the seat, hits his shoulder, goes down through this one, across and down through this one, and out his side. And his arms go like this, and his feet go like this, and the airplane, the helicopter, just goes straight up. And now, he's not talking to me, and I'm watching him, and I see the helicopter go straight up. Well, his observer's in the right seat trying to spray at the bad guys, and all of a sudden he's like this, and he looks over at Al, and Al's like this, and so he throws his weapon out and grabs the cyclic and pushes it like this. I see the helicopter go like this, then I see it go like this, and there's a big tree right here, and it comes down and he can't pull out. And so he just slams through the tree and then flips end over end in the air and crashes right side up. And all the blades came off, and it was a mess. And we were out there all by ourselves, just him and I. But I had seen a Huey from another unit just go by about 3 or 4 minutes ago. Must have been doing the same kind of thing, checking the weather. So I get on guard frequency and I said, hey, this is Lew, my little bird's down, I need help, anybody in the area? And he answers me back. I say, turn around, we're by Firebase on, I'll cover you if you can come in. I think the guys are alive, I see one person moving, let's see if we can pick them up. And I said, don't worry about the bad guys, I'll take care of them. And so I covered him, we got him in. The observer was okay. We put Al in the Huey. We flew him to a medevac unit, and I thought, I got the word later what had happened to him, and I thought he had died. And as it turned out, we had a reunion in New Orleans in 1991, and the guys in my unit surprised me. They brought Al to the reunion with his family. Anyways, needless to say, we have been together many, many times since then. This is me. I've now flown over 700 missions, and it's my turn to go home. What's interesting about this picture is a couple of things. It's my Hollywood shot. The uniform has changed. You know, when I started, I was wearing cotton jungle fatigues. Now I've actually got a full no-mix uniform on, but the Army don't want you to wear flight suits. They still hate the Air Force from 1947. So we had to make them look like fatigues. I've been promoted. I'm now a Chief Warrant Officer. And the most telling thing is my eyes. I've seen way too much. I've got the 1,000-yard stare. I don't smile much. I've seen it all. So I'm ready to go home. And what's really cool about this picture, I have the newest helicopter in the whole unit, the only helicopter that's air conditioned. Then I gotta give it up. I'll wrap this up with a few interesting statistics. Larry Bell and Company built 10,005 Hueys during the Vietnam era, from 1957 to 1975. 7,013 went to Vietnam. The Huey flew 9,713,000 flight hours. It is the most combat experienced aircraft in history. All the services, with all their helicopters, we had 12,000 total. And those 12,000 helicopters flew over 10 million flight hours.